The rifle's report cracked through the pre-dawn darkness like the hand of God reaching down to touch mortality. 520 meters away, through wind that carried the taste of ancient dust and diesel fuel, through air so cold it burned the lungs, the enemy commander's chest exploded in a mist of red that looked black in the green glow of night vision. He dropped, instantly, completely. The way men fall when the connection between brain and body is severed by copper-jacketed lead traveling at 2,600 feet per second. The radio frequencies went silent. Not the silence of peace, but the silence of shock. The silence of men who just witnessed something they couldn't quite process. Something that shouldn't have been possible. Then Sergeant Riker Dalton's voice, rough with 3 decades of tobacco and sand, whispered across the tactical net. Holy Mother of God, she made the shot. They'd called her just a girl when she arrived 3 days earlier. They'd given her Sector 4, the quiet position, the place where commanders put personnel they don't trust with anything important. They'd told her to observe, not to engage, to watch, not to act. They'd been wrong about all of it. But this story doesn't start in the darkness of an Afghan forward operating base. It starts 33 years earlier, in a different desert, under a different sky, with a different strand. With the man who would forge a legacy from sand and blood and the mathematics of death at distance. Master Gunnery Sergeant Declan Strand was 28 years old the first time he understood that some men are born to see what others miss. That some people possess a gift that has nothing to do with want or training or dedication, something that simply exists in the architecture of their nervous system, something that makes them capable of things that look like magic but are actually just geometry executed with religious precision. The sandstorm had rolled in from the northwest like the breath of an angry god. Visibility dropped to 20 meters. Radio communications dissolved into static. The Iraqi counterattack that intelligence had promised wouldn't happen was happening anyway, and Bravo Company was pinned down in a dried riverbed that would become their mass grave if someone didn't do something in the next 5 minutes. Declan lay on his belly atop a rocky outcropping that the Marines had designated Hill 142, despite it being barely 40 feet higher than the surrounding terrain. His M40A1 rifle pressed against his shoulder, his eye to the scope, his world narrowed to a circle of magnified vision that showed him nothing but swirling sand. "Strand, can you see anything?" Lieutenant Morrison's voice carried the particular strain of a young officer watching his men die and having no good options remaining. "Negative, sir. The storm's too thick." "Then we're pulling back. We can't hold this position blind." Declan watched the sand patterns, not trying to see through them, but trying to understand them. The way the particles moved, the way the wind created eddies and clear pockets that lasted for fractions of seconds, the way light and shadow played tricks that most people couldn't interpret. There, a shape, gone in an instant, but present long enough for his brain to register and categorize. Human. Officer. Iraqi Republican Guard, based on the uniform cut visible for 0.4 seconds. 800 meters distant, directing the attack that was systematically destroying Bravo Company. "Sir, I have a target." Iraqi commander. 800 meters. "I can make the shot." "In this?" Morrison's voice carried frank disbelief. "Strand, you can't even see him." "I can see enough, sir." A pause. Gunfire crackling in the background. Men screaming. The specific sounds of a unit coming apart under pressure. "Take it," Declan breathed. Once, twice, waiting for the pattern, waiting for the sand to create the opening he needed. Not hoping for it, knowing it would come. Because the desert had rules, and if you understood the rules, you could work within them. The wind shifted. The sand parted. Half a second of visibility, maybe less. He fired. 800 meters away, the Iraqi commander collapsed. The attack that had been coordinated and deadly suddenly became confused and hesitant. officers shouting conflicting orders, units advancing without support. The kind of chaos that happens when the brain directing the operation stops functioning. Bravo Company held, then counterattacked. By sunset, Hill 142 and the surrounding area were secure. 43 Marines went home to their families instead of going home in boxes. Declan never forgot that number, 43. It became the mathematics of his life, the equation that would haunt him for 3 decades. How many men could he save? How many deaths could he prevent? What was the exchange rate between killing and protecting? By the time Desert Storm ended 100 days after it began, he'd made 52 confirmed kills. Each one documented, each one verified, each one necessary, each one a weight he'd carry for the rest of his life. The Navy Cross they gave him sat in a box in his closet. He never displayed it, never mentioned it. Because every time he looked at that ribbon, he saw the 3 Marines from his own scout sniper team who died in the final days of the war, killed by an Iraqi artillery barrage that he'd failed to predict, failed to see coming. 52 lives taken, 3 lives lost. The math should have balanced in his favor, but guilt doesn't work on mathematical principles. The weight of those 52 kills followed him home, followed him through discharge, in civilian life, in marriage, in the birth of a son. Followed him through quiet Montana nights when sleep wouldn't come and the faces of dead men appeared in the darkness behind his closed eyes. Not accusing, not angry, just there, present, a permanent gallery of ghosts that would never leave. His son Marcus grew up watching his father stare out windows at landscapes only he could see. Grew up with a father who was physically present but emotionally elsewhere, who taught him to hunt and fish and shoot, but never talked about the war, never explained the faraway look, never shared the weight. Marcus died in a car accident in 2001, 18 years old, drunk driver, wrong place, wrong time. The randomness of it was almost worse than the loss. Declan had spent 100 days in Kuwait killing to protect people, had made impossible shots to save lives, and his own son died because someone had 3 beers too many and ran a red light. The universe had a cruel sense of irony. But Marcus had left behind a daughter, born 3 months before he died, a baby girl with her father's dark blonde hair and eyes the color of winter storms, eyes that looked at the world like it was a puzzle waiting to be solved. Declan held his granddaughter in the hospital the day after his son's funeral and realized something. The curse could be broken. The weight could be transformed. The 52 lives he'd taken could become 520 lives saved if he was willing to do the work. If he was willing to take the gift that had brought death and teach it to bring life. The ranch sprawled across 300 acres of high country where the wind carried stories from distant mountains and the sky stretched so wide it made men feel appropriately small. Declan Strand, now 44 years old, stood behind his granddaughter and wondered if redemption could be inherited. Ilara was 6, small for her age, dark blonde hair pulled back in a ponytail, gray eyes the color of winter storms. She held the rifle the way most 6-year-olds hold toys, with casual familiarity that suggested this wasn't her first time. It was her 100th time. "You see that fence post, sweetheart?" She nodded, not taking her eye from the scope, already understanding that talking while aiming was wasted energy. 300 yards. You see the tin can balanced on top? "I see it, Grandpa." "Good. Now forget everything except that can. Forget me. Forget yourself. There's only the target and the space between you. That space has rules, wind, gravity, temperature, all trying to push your bullet off course. Your job is to understand those rules better than they understand themselves." She adjusted her position slightly, correcting her breathing pattern without being told. 6 years old and already understanding principles that most adult shooters never fully grasped. The rifle cracked. 300 yards away, the tin can pinged off the fence post. Declan didn't smile, didn't praise, just nodded once. The way he nodded at everything important. Again, she worked the bolt, ejected the spent casing, loaded another round, found the target, fired, another hit. Again, 5 shots, 5 hits. At 6 years old, at 300 yards, most people would have called it prodigy. Declan called it recognition. He was looking at something he'd seen once before, in the mirror, 30 years ago, before the sand and the blood and the weight of 52 lives taken. It's not about the gun, Elara. His voice was quiet but carried the weight of certainty. It's about seeing what others miss. Most people look at that fence post and see 300 yards of impossible. You look at it and see geometry. That's not something I can teach you. Either you see it or you don't. You see it. She looked up at him then, those gray eyes holding questions she was too young to articulate. Why was this important? Why did Grandpa spend every weekend teaching her to shoot? Why did he sometimes get that faraway look, like he was seeing something terrible that existed only in his memory? Why do I need to learn this, Grandpa? He crouched beside her, put his weathered hand on her small shoulder. Because I took lives for my country, sweetheart. 52 of them. That's a debt I can never repay. But maybe you can. Maybe you'll save 520. Maybe you'll save more. Maybe the gift I used to destroy, you'll use to protect. That's how we break the curse. She didn't understand. Not then. But she would. Every weekend for the next 10 years, they came to this same spot. Rain or shine, summer heat or winter cold. Declan teaching, Elara learning, not just marksmanship, but the philosophy behind it, the mathematics of wind and distance, the geometry of ballistics, the mental discipline required to make the impossible shot when everything depended on it. He taught her wind reading by making her watch grass and leaves and dust patterns for hours before ever touching a rifle. Taught her range estimation by having her guess distances, then measure them until her estimates became indistinguishable from measured truth. Taught her breathing control through meditation techniques he'd learned from a Marine Corps instructor decades ago. But most importantly, he taught her to see, to observe details that most people missed, to build three-dimensional models of terrain in her mind, to understand that shooting was 10% trigger pull and 90% preparation. By the time she was 14, she could outshoot most adult hunters. By 16, she was hitting targets at ranges that seemed impossible for someone using commercial hunting rifles. By 18, when she told him she wanted to enlist, he wasn't surprised. Army Sniper School, she said, I want to do what you did. No, his voice was firm. You want to do what I should have done. There's a difference. He went to his office, returned with a leather notebook, edges worn from decades of handling, Strand's Desert Manual, written on the cover in his careful script. I started writing this in '92, after I came home, after I realized the 52 kills would haunt me forever unless I transformed them into something else. This contains everything I learned, every technique, every mistake, every correction. It's yours now. He also gave her the scope, the custom-built optic he'd crafted during Desert Storm, DS-91 engraved on the side. This glass has seen things most people never will. 52 confirmed kills, but also 43 lives saved in one shot. The good and the bad, the darkness and the light. It's yours now. Use it to save people. Use it to prove that my darkness can birth light. Fort Benning, Georgia, Sniper School graduation, June 2018. Corporal Elara Strand stood at attention in her dress blues, while the commandant read her name and awards. Distinguished graduate, top shot, highest overall scores in a class of 43 students. 43, the same number of Marines her grandfather had saved in Kuwait. The universe had a sense of humor. The male students clapped, some genuinely, some going through the motions. She could tell the difference. Had learned to read the subtle tells over 4 years in the Army, the way certain men smiled with their mouths but not their eyes, The way they'd congratulate her while simultaneously diminishing the achievement. Hell of a performance, Strand. Guess the standards really are the same for everyone now, huh? Translation: you only made it through because they lowered the bar. She'd stopped responding to that particular accusation around the same time she'd stopped trying to prove herself with words. Words were cheap. Bullets were honest. Downrange, nobody cared about your gender, only whether you could make the shot when someone's life depended on it. Her grandfather had taught her that, among other things. He died 18 months earlier. March 2016. Stroke. Quick and clean. The way he would have wanted it. She'd been in advanced infantry training, 8 weeks from graduation, when she got the call. Emergency leave. Compassionate reassignment. All the military terminology that meant someone you loved had stopped existing. By the time she made it home, he was already gone. No final conversation, no goodbye. Just a box of his personal effects and a letter he'd written years earlier, to be opened after his death. She'd read it alone in her barracks, read it 3 times, memorized every word. Ilara, if you're reading this, I'm gone. I spent 28 years carrying the weight of 52 lives I took, carried it like stones in my pockets, never put them down, never forgave myself. Then you were born, small and perfect and looking at the world like it was a puzzle you were determined to solve. I realized something. I can't erase the past, but I can multiply the future. Every life you save, every soldier you train, they're not my redemption. They're proof that darkness can birth light. You're not continuing my legacy, you're transcending it. Don't prove you're as good as men, prove redemption is real. I love you. I'm proud of you. Make the shots I couldn't. Save the people I failed. Break the curse. Grandpa. She'd kept the letter, kept the custom scope he'd built during Desert Storm, kept the leather-bound notebook he'd filled with 3 decades of knowledge. Strand's Desert Manual. Every technique he'd developed, every lesson he'd learned, every mistake he'd made in the corrections that followed. It was her inheritance. Not money or property, knowledge. The accumulated wisdom of a man who'd seen war at its worst and spent the rest of his life trying to balance the scales. The next 6 years passed in a blur of deployments in training rotations. She served well, performed competently, made her shots, followed orders, but she never got the opportunity to truly test what her grandfather had taught her. Never faced the crucible that would prove whether his methods worked when everything was chaos and death and impossible geometry. Until FOB Sentinel, the armored transport ground to a halt in a cloud of dust that hung in the thin mountain air like a visible curse. Ilara Strand stepped out into the pre-dawn cold, carrying her rifle case with both hands. Not slung over her shoulder like the male snipers who'd emerged before her, held carefully, respectfully, the way you carry something that contains your entire professional identity. She was 30 years old, medium height, lean build, face that was neither beautiful nor plain, just professionally neutral. The face of someone who'd learned early that attracting attention was rarely beneficial. Dark blonde hair tied back in regulation style, gray eyes that cataloged everything and revealed nothing. Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Thorne stood at the command post, watching the new arrivals with the particular skepticism of a man who'd commanded in 3 wars and had long since stopped being impressed by paper qualifications. 58 years old, Gulf War veteran, 2 tours in Iraq, 1 in Afghanistan. He'd seen every type of soldier the Army could produce, thought he'd developed reliable instincts for separating competence from credential. He watched the female sniper step onto the gravel, watched her immediately begin visually analyzing the defensive positions. Not with the aggressive confidence of someone trying to prove something, just with the quiet focus of someone gathering data. That's our sniper reinforcement? His voice carried disappointment he didn't try to hide. Sergeant Riker Dalton consulted his tablet. 48 years old, face weathered by 26 years of service. A scar through his left eyebrow, courtesy of Fallujah. He'd survived this long by trusting nothing and questioning everything. Corporal Elara Strand, Fort Benning Distinguished Graduate, expert qualification on M110 system. File says she's got the highest scores in her class. File. Thorne made the word sound like an accusation. You know what files don't tell you, Sergeant? Whether someone can perform when the bullets are real and the distance isn't measured on a nice clean range with flags every 50 meters. Dalton didn't disagree, just watched the young woman moving through equipment checks with methodical precision. Something about her movements triggered a memory, something familiar in the way she handled her rifle case. Sir, her last name, Strand. That ring any bells? Thorne frowned, searched his memory, then his eyes widened slightly. Strand, Jesus. Declan Strand? The legend himself. Desert Storm, 52 confirmed kills. That 800-meter shot through the sandstorm that saved Bravo Company. They still teach his techniques at the schoolhouse. I know who Declan Strand was, Sergeant. I learned the Strand method at Sniper Instructor course back in '05. Declan himself taught that session. Best 2 weeks of training I ever received. Thorne paused. You think she's related? Granddaughter, according to her file. He trained her personally from age 6. Thorne watched the young woman with new interest. Declan Strand's granddaughter. The man was a legend in Marine Corps Scout Sniper community, one of the best long-range shooters the military had ever produced. But that didn't mean his skills were genetic. Didn't mean this young woman was anything more than a name riding on a dead man's reputation. Declan was 1 in a million, Sergeant. Lightning doesn't strike twice. Assign her to Sector 4 with your team. Observation duty. Let's see what she can actually do before we trust her with anything critical. Sector 4. Everyone knew what that meant. The quiet sector. The position farthest from expected contact, where commanders put personnel they don't trust. The military equivalent of being benched. Elara heard the assignment, showed no reaction, just nodded once and gathered her equipment. She'd been underestimated before. It usually didn't end well for the enemy. As she moved toward her assigned position, her rifle case caught Thorne's attention. There was something engraved on the side. He couldn't quite make it out from this distance, but it looked like letters. DS-91. Desert Storm, 1991. She was carrying her grandfather's scope, the one he'd custom-built for the M40A1, the one that had seen 52 confirmed kills across Kuwait and Iraq, the glass that had looked into the eyes of death and never blinked. Thorne felt something uncomfortable settle in his chest. Not quite guilt, not quite concern, just the specific awareness that maybe, possibly, he'd made a mistake. That maybe this young woman wasn't just trading on a name. Maybe she'd actually inherited something real. But inherited talent and proven performance were different things. The only evaluation that mattered would come when the shooting started. When distance and wind and fear conspired to make the impossible shot the only thing standing between survival and slaughter. He'd know soon enough. They all would. The heat pressed down like a physical weight. 98 degrees in the shade, except there was no shade. Just rocks and dust and the kind of sun that turned the world into a furnace. Elara had been in position for 8 hours, had eaten 1 meal, ready to eat, had drunk 2 liters of water, had observed every inch of terrain within 1,000 meters until she could close her eyes and see the landscape in perfect detail. The dried riverbed snaked through the valley like a surgical scar. Boulders scattered across the approaches provided cover and concealment. The eastern slope rose at a gentle angle, dotted with rock formations that looked natural but would be perfect for defensive positions. And that outcropping at 280 meters, the one that dominated sight lines to sectors 2 and 3, the one that screamed tactical significance to anyone with basic training in defensive operations. She'd marked it in her notebook, had calculated firing angles, had determined that a technical vehicle with a mounted machine gun positioned there could enfilade both defensive sectors simultaneously. could suppress two positions while a ground assault rolled through the riverbed. It was textbook. Any competent enemy force would identify it within hours of reconnaissance. Sergeant Dalton. He looked up from his radio check, his scarred eyebrow deepening as his frown intensified. What? She pointed to the outcropping, that position at 280 meters, eastern slope. Someone with a technical weapon could set up there and hit sectors 2 and 3 from a flanking angle. Sector 3's position doesn't have line of sight to it. They're oriented for frontal assault, not enfilade fire. And Sector 2 can't traverse their weapons that far east without exposing their flank to northern approaches. Dalton squinted at the rocks she'd indicated. Several seconds passed. She could see him processing, evaluating, then dismissing. That's outside our sector. Yes, Sergeant, but it's a gap in our defensive coverage. If the enemy positions a weapon there, they could suppress both positions simultaneously while ground forces advance through the riverbed. It's a critical vulnerability. His voice hardened, took on that edge that sergeants develop when junior personnel overstep boundaries. I didn't ask for tactical analysis. I asked you to watch your assigned sector. Do that. She wanted to press, wanted to explain that she'd spent the morning cataloging dust patterns that suggested recent disturbance, vegetation displacement that indicated careful movement within the past 48 hours, rock faces showing clean sides exposed to sun in ways that natural weathering wouldn't produce. Someone had been here, recently, professionally, mapping their defenses with the same precision she was now using to identify weaknesses. But pressing wouldn't help, would only confirm his existing belief that she was overstepping, acting above her pay grade, trying to prove something instead of just doing her job. Yes, Sergeant, she returned to her range card, but added a small notation in the margin. Outcropping 280 meters, enfilade threat, unobserved. Private First Class Cade Hollister watched her from his fighting position 10 meters away. 20 years old, face that belonged in a high school yearbook, not a combat zone. Wisconsin accent that turns certain words into music. You really think they're coming? They're already here, Hollister. They've been watching us for days. Now they're just waiting for the right moment. How do you know? She gestured to the far tree line. Vegetation patterns, disturbed earth, boot prints in areas that local wildlife wouldn't access. Someone's been conducting reconnaissance, professional reconnaissance, the kind that comes before a planned assault. Specialist Rhett Calloway spoke up from his position. 29 years old, quiet in the way that suggested he'd seen things that made talking feel pointless. He was the kind of soldier who spoke maybe 10 words per hour, and each one carried weight. She qualified expert, Hollister. That means she can see things we miss. Leave it alone. The sun tracked across the sky, shadows lengthened, temperature dropped. By 1800 hours, Alara had completed her terrain analysis, had identified 17 potential enemy approach routes, had calculated range and wind compensation for each likely engagement zone, had built a three-dimensional model of the battlefield in her mind that existed at a level of detail most people couldn't imagine. Dalton came by during shift change, watched her working through her range card with mechanical precision. Something in his expression shifted. Not quite respect, but recognition. One professional acknowledging another's competence. You're good with that rifle. My grandfather taught me, Sergeant. Started when I was 6. Military? Marine Corps, Scout Sniper, Desert Storm, and Somalia. 52 confirmed kills between both deployments. Something changed in Dalton's face. The skepticism didn't vanish, but it cracked slightly, like ice beginning to thaw. Which unit? 1st Marine Division. He was the one who made that 800-meter shot through the sandstorm. Saved Bravo Company. Dalton was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried a different quality, something that might have been respect. Declan Strand. I've heard the stories. They still teach his techniques. The Strand method. Wind reading in adverse conditions, shooting through environmental obstructions. He was a legend. He died 18 months ago. Stroke. 3 weeks before I graduated sniper school. I'm sorry. He left me his manual. Everything he learned in 30 years. Every technique, every lesson, every mistake and correction. She paused. He said I wasn't supposed to continue his legacy. I was supposed to transcend it, turn his 52 kills into 520 lives saved. Dalton stared at her, really looked at her for the first time since she'd arrived, seeing not a diversity hire or a political statement or a liability, seeing a soldier who'd been forged by one of the best snipers the military had ever produced. He'd be proud. Making it through sniper school, that's no small thing. Thank you, Sergeant. The night fell fast the way it does in high-altitude environments. One moment the sun was setting, the next, darkness owned the world. Stars emerged in numbers that city dwellers never see. The Milky Way sprawling across the sky like someone had spilled diamonds on black velvet. Ilara took first watch, switched her optic to night vision mode. The world transformed into shades of green and shadow. She scanned her sector with the methodical precision her grandfather had drilled into her for 24 years. Every rock, every piece of dead ground, every potential firing position. And there, at the edge of her perception, movement, thermal signatures, brief, organized, 400 meters out, maybe more, moving in patterns that demonstrated training and discipline. Not animals, not random civilian activity, professional military movement using terrain features to minimize exposure. She watched for 15 minutes, tracking the shapes as they moved through dead ground, utilizing cover with the kind of expertise that confirmed her earlier assessment. They'd been studying this position, mapping fields of fire, counting defenders, preparing for an assault that would exploit every weakness in the defensive perimeter. She lifted her radio, then hesitated. Dalton would dismiss it. Heat signatures from rocks cooling after sunset. Animals. Desert mirages that didn't stop when the sun went down. She could hear his response already. The jumpy rookie crying wolf at shadows, confirming every doubt about her presence here. So she documented it instead. Coordinates in her notebook, movement patterns, estimated number of personnel, times and azimuths, building a picture of enemy activity that nobody else was seeing, recording it in the neat handwriting her grandfather would have recognized. He'd kept similar notebooks during Desert Storm, pages of observations that seemed meaningless until the pattern emerged, until individual data points connected to form a larger picture. The enemy was preparing, not for tomorrow, for soon. They'd done their reconnaissance, identified weaknesses, mapped defensive positions. Now they were conducting final verification, confirming intelligence, preparing for an assault that would hit exactly where defenders were most vulnerable. At 0200 hours, Calloway relieved her for middle watch. She tried to sleep, but couldn't. Adrenaline had triggered something primal, the combat instinct that recognized danger even when conscious thought couldn't articulate why. She lay in her sleeping position with eyes closed, but every nerve alive to night sounds. The wind through rock formations, generator noise from the base, occasional radio traffic from other sectors reporting negative contact. All quiet, nothing to report. But something was wrong. The night felt wrong, too quiet perhaps, or not quiet in the right way, like the universe holding its breath before violence erupted. At 0345 hours, something did. No warning, no probing fire, no gradual buildup, just sudden, overwhelming violence that transformed night into day. The explosion that ripped through Sector 2 turned darkness into brilliant orange light for 3 seconds. The eastern machine gun nest, the anchor of the northern defensive arc, simply ceased to exist. The pressure wave rolled across the valley like physical thunder, dust shaking loose from rocks, equipment rattling. The blast hitting Alara's chest like a fist. Tracer rounds followed immediately, red streams of death converging on defensive positions with terrifying accuracy. Not random fire, not panic shooting, precisely coordinated streams targeting specific positions from angles that suggested the enemy knew exactly where every defender was located. Contact! Contact all sectors! We are under attack! Captain Thorne's voice erupted over the radio, already strained, already shifting into the clipped cadence of a commander trying to impose order on chaos. Ilara was rolling into her firing position before conscious thought caught up with her body's reflexive response. Weapon up, eye to scope, night vision activated, world narrowing to the circle of green-tinted vision that would define the next few hours. Muzzle flashes erupted everywhere, the dried riverbed, the eastern slope, positions that shouldn't have clear lines of fire but somehow did. They'd mapped everything, every blind spot, every weakness, every position where defenders thought they were safe but weren't. Sector 4, what do you see? Dalton's voice carried sudden alertness, the comfortable skepticism replaced by genuine urgency. Her scope swept the riverbed below. The image that resolved made her stomach drop. Multiple shooters in the riverbed, 180 to 250 meters, at least 15. They're advancing under covering fire. Another explosion. Sector 1. Then another. The distinctive crump of mortar rounds finding their targets. Someone had pre-plotted firing solutions, had spent days calculating exactly where to place indirect fire for maximum effect. Can you engage? Her crosshairs settled on a figure directing others with hand signals. Team leader, organizing the assault, coordinating fire and movement with professional competence. 220 meters, slight downhill angle, minimal wind. She'd made this shot 100 times in training, could make it now in her sleep. I have a target, fire team leader, 220 meters. Negative, do not fire. Sector 4 is designated observation only. You'll give away your position. Every instinct screamed at her to take the shot. The enemy leader was organizing a flanking maneuver that would roll up Sector 3 within minutes. She could see it developing. The hand signals, the movement patterns, the textbook small unit tactics that would exploit the gap she'd tried to warn them about. Sergeant, they're moving on Sector 3's flank. I can interdict. I said negative. That's an order, Corporal. She held fire. Not because she doubted the shot, not because Dalton ordered it, because she understood something he didn't yet. If she fired now and missed, unlikely but possible, she'd reveal their position for nothing. If she fired now and hit, Dalton would find a way to blame her for disobeying orders. She needed to wait for the moment when everyone would understand that her shot wasn't insubordination. It was survival. Sectors 1 and 3 returned fire, but their angles were wrong. The enemy had positioned themselves perfectly, using terrain Ilara had mapped 12 hours earlier. The dried riverbed provided defilade from direct fire. Boulder fields offered covered approaches, and that outcropping on the eastern slope sat empty but perfect, waiting. Then she heard it, the distinctive sound of a vehicle engine roaring up the eastern slope, exactly where she'd predicted. Settling into position at 280 meters, with a machine gunner already traversing his weapon towards Sector 3's exposed flank. Technical on the eastern outcropping. Her voice was forcefully calm despite adrenaline flooding her system. Sector 3, you have incoming fire from your 4 o'clock. The warning came seconds too late. The PKM machine gun opened up. 700 rounds per minute of 7.62 millimeter ammunition tearing through Sector 3's position, sandbags exploding into clouds of dirt and fabric. Return fire ceasing as men dove for cover that didn't exist. The sustained burst lasted 15 seconds, transformed a fighting position into a casualty collection point. When it finally stopped, the radio erupted with overlapping transmissions. 3 is hit! 3 is hit! Someone screaming. Not words, just sound. The universal language of men watching friends die. Ilara's crosshairs centered on the Technical's gunner, 280 meters. Uphill angle approximately 15 degrees. Slight crosswind from the west. Her breathing slowed automatically, heart rate dropping as training overrode fear. Her body entering the zone her grandfather had taught her existed. That place where conscious thought stepped aside and let competence take over. Strand. Dalton's voice came from right beside her, low and intense. I swear to God if you fire. She watched Sector 3 taking sustained fire, watched soldiers scrambling, watched the tactical situation deteriorating by the second. The Technical's gunner was reloading, feeding a fresh belt into the weapon. 5 seconds before he opened fire again. 4 seconds before 3 men died. 3 seconds before their defensive line collapsed. Strand, Dalton shouted, no longer maintaining noise discipline, his voice carrying equal parts command and desperation. 2 seconds. 1 second. The rifle's report cracked through the chaos. 280 meters away, the machine gunner's head snapped back. He collapsed across his weapon. The PKM that had been systematically destroying Sector 3 suddenly went silent. Dalton stared at her, his expression somewhere between shock and awe. Holy Mother of God, you got him! But Ilara was already tracking her next target. Movement behind the Technical. Another figure emerging from the truck's cab, reaching for the PKM, trying to get the weapon back into action. Smart. Disciplined. The kind of enemy that didn't quit just because one man fell. She fired again. The second figure dropped before his hands reached the weapon. Confirmed kills. Captain Thorne's voice snapped over the radio. Command discipline reasserting itself, even as surprise colored his tone. Sector 4, is that Technical neutralized? Ilara kept her eye to the scope, scanning for additional threats around the vehicle. No further movement. Technical is down, sir. No further activity at that position. The defensive coordination that had been collapsing under overwhelming fire suddenly found structure again, found purpose, found the possibility of survival. The enemy force in the riverbed, suddenly without their supporting weapon, lost the cohesion they'd maintained during the initial assault. Men who'd been advancing with confidence dove for cover, reassessing, trying to understand where the death was coming from. Ilara didn't give them time to figure it out. Her scope tracked across the battlefield with mechanical precision, not hunting, harvesting. Each target selected based on tactical priority rather than convenience. Fire team leaders first, then radio operators, then crew-served weapon teams. The kills that would create maximum disruption with minimum ammunition expenditure. 340 meters. Squad leader directing fire from behind a boulder cluster. She could see him gesturing, coordinating, creating order from chaos. The shot dropped him mid-sentence. His radio operator reached for the handset, never completed the movement. 2 kills. The enemy's communication network fragmenting. 200 meters. Machine gun teams setting up in the dried riverbed. The gunner had just mounted the PKM on its bipod when her bullet punched through his chest. His assistant tried to take over, managed to get one hand on the weapon before the second shot ended his attempt. 4 kills total. Another crew-served weapon silenced. 420 meters. Mortar spotter calling corrections. She could see him through her scope, binoculars raised, completely focused on adjusting fire onto Sector 1. Never saw her, never knew. Just stopped existing between one breath and the next. 5 kills. The indirect fire that had been systematically destroying positions suddenly became random and ineffective. The mathematics were brutal but necessary. Each trigger pull removed one variable from the tactical equation. Each confirmed kill degraded enemy capability by measurable amounts. This wasn't anger, wasn't hatred, just geometry executed with religious precision. The way her grandfather had taught her, the way she'd practiced 10,000 times. Strand, you're clearing them out. Thorne's voice carried something new, Not quite belief, but recognition. Keep going. She shifted her aim to the far tree line, 500 meters, where enemy forces had pulled back, thinking themselves safe at extreme range, thinking the standard M4 carbines couldn't reach them. They were right about that, but she wasn't carrying an M4. A figure emerged from cover. Officer, based on the way others deferred to him, coordinating the assault from what he thought was a position of safety. 500 meters, slight uphill angle, wind from the northwest, maybe 8 miles per hour. She adjusted, compensated, fired. The officer dropped. 6 kills. The enemy coordination degraded further. Units fighting independently now. No central command. No unified plan. Just chaos in desperation. Then came the mortar team. The threat that could turn the entire battle if left unchecked. She'd been tracking them since the assault began. Watched them set up. Watched them range in on friendly positions. They were good, professional, the kind of threat that required elimination. 580 meters. In the darkness before dawn, the mortar team leader coordinating indirect fire that was systematically destroying defensive positions. The range was extreme. The darkness made target identification difficult, but she could see the distinctive shape of the mortar tube, could see figures moving around it with practiced efficiency. She adjusted for the distance, for the uphill angle, for wind she could feel but barely see. Built the ballistic solution in her mind, not conscious math, just instinct forged from 2 decades of practice. The same instinct her grandfather had used to make an 800-meter shot through a sandstorm. The same gift that had saved 43 Marines in Kuwait. The rifle cracked. 580 meters away, the mortar team leader collapsed. The careful fire coordination that had been walking rounds onto friendly positions suddenly devolved into random shooting. Tubes firing without proper adjustment. Rounds landing in empty terrain. The precision artillery support that should have been crushing Sector 1 became ineffective harassment fire. Mortar team neutralized, she transmitted, her voice carrying the same calm she'd used to report weather conditions. Thorne's voice came back, no longer hiding his shock. Strand, that was damn near 600 meters. In darkness, how? Target of opportunity, sir, had the angle. 7 kills, but the assault wasn't broken, still had numbers, still had momentum, even if that momentum was faltering. Then she saw the flanking force, 30 combatants, maybe more, moving through dead ground along the dried riverbed, using terrain features to stay invisible to everyone except Sector 4. They were in loose column formation, probably thinking they were safely concealed in shadows in broken ground, heading toward a point that would put them in Sector 1's rear area. Once there, they could roll up the defensive line from behind, attack positions oriented to defend against frontal assault, not rear attack. It would be a massacre. Sector 4 to all positions, she transmitted with forced calm. Enemy flanking force, 30-plus personnel moving through the riverbed towards Sector 1's rear area. I can interdict. 4, this is 1. Thorne's voice carried confusion. We don't see them. They're using terrain for concealment, sir. Dead ground in the riverbed, but they'll emerge at grid, November, Victor, 6-4 in approximately 3 minutes. When they reach that point, they'll be in your 6 o'clock with clear fields of fire into your rear positions. A pause. She could imagine Thorne processing that information, trying to verify it with his own observation, weighing whether to trust the assessment of a corporal he dismissed 20 hours ago. Then his voice came back, different now, the skepticism replaced by something else. Can you stop them, Corporal? The question carried weight beyond its simple words. Not, can you shoot at them? Can you stop them? Can you eliminate this threat before it eliminates us? Can you do what needs to be done with the same precision you've demonstrated for the past hour? I can slow them down, sir, but I'll need the rest of 4 to cover my flanks while I'm engaged. If I'm focused on the riverbed, we're vulnerable to threats from other directions. Do it. 4, You have authorization to engage. All other sectors be advised. Sector 4 is engaging enemy flanking force in the riverbed. Stand by for potential enemy reaction. Ilara shifted her position slightly, getting a better angle down into the riverbed where the flanking force was moving. They were good, maintaining noise discipline, using available cover, moving with coordination that came from units that had trained together. But they'd made one critical assumption that proved fatal. They'd assumed the dried riverbed provided complete concealment from observation. It didn't. Not from Sector 4's elevated position. Not from someone who'd spent 12 hours studying this exact terrain, memorizing every fold in the ground, every boulder, every approach route. She took the lead man first. 340 meters. He was navigating for the column, probably the most experienced in terrain association, confident in his ability to guide them through dead ground. The shot was clean. One moment he was moving forward, the next he was down. 8 kills. The column stopped immediately. Fighters dropping into cover, trying to understand what had just happened. Their concealment wasn't as good as they thought. Someone had eyes on them. Someone could shoot them. She took the second man, then skipped to the rear of the column, identifying what looked like an officer or senior NCO directing the movement. He went down, clutching his chest, and with him went the flanking force's command and control. 10 kills. Contact! Contact in the riverbed! The shout came over the enemy frequency they'd been monitoring. Arabic, but the meaning was clear from context and tone. Confusion. Suppression. Their flanking maneuver collapsing before it achieved its objective. The flanking force tried to continue forward, some fighters breaking cover to rush toward their objective. They exposed themselves to Ilara's field of fire and paid for it. Others tried to retreat, pulling back the way they'd come, only to run into bursts of machine gun fire from Sector 2 that had finally gotten a firing angle into the riverbed. Caught between precision fire from above and area fire from the flank, the flanking force dissolved as an organized unit. Bodies scattered across the riverbed, survivors fleeing in small groups. The coordinated maneuver that should have rolled up the defensive line instead became a killing ground. Ilara counted her shots, tracked her kills. 11 total from the flanking force. Combined with the previous engagements, 17 confirmed kills. 17 enemy combatants who'd stopped existing because she'd been competent enough to make geometry work at distance. Flanking force neutralized, she reported, already scanning for new threats even as she spoke. Sector 1's rear area is secure. The assault that should have overwhelmed FOB Sentinel was breaking apart. Not routed, professional soldiers don't rout easily, but disrupted, degraded, forced to reassess. The carefully planned operation that should have destroyed the defensive line had run into something unexpected, something that shouldn't have existed. A single shooter who'd systematically dismantled their attack from a position they dismissed as insignificant. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern ridge with gold, the enemy pulled back, dragging their wounded, abandoning equipment, withdrawing to regroup and reconsider. The battle wasn't over, but the immediate crisis had passed. Dawn broke over a valley transformed into testament of violence. Smoke drifted in lazy spirals, thick with cordite and diesel, and the smell soldiers recognized but never spoke about directly. Spent brass littered the ground around defensive positions like copper rain that had fallen during darkness and refused to evaporate. The technical vehicle sat silent on the outcropping, its gunner draped over the side like a grim flag. Ilara sat with her back against the rock wall, cleaning her rifle with methodical precision despite exhaustion weighing on every muscle. Her hands moved through the familiar sequence: bore brush, cleaning patches, oil applied sparingly to moving parts. The weapon had saved their lives, multiple lives. It deserved proper care. That was the contract between soldier and equipment that her grandfather had taught her. You maintain your tools with religious devotion. They function when your life depends on it. 17 confirmed kills. The number sat in her mind like a physical object. Not with pride, not with satisfaction, just with the cold awareness that 17 human beings had stopped existing because she'd been competent enough to make geometry work at distance. They'd been trying to kill her people. She'd stop them. That was the mathematics of combat. Simple, brutal, necessary. Captain Thorne appeared at Sector 4's position as the sun painted the eastern ridge gold. His uniform was torn and dirty. His face showed the particular exhaustion that came from commanding men through sustained violence. He'd aged a decade overnight, the lines around his eyes deeper, his posture carrying weight that hadn't been there 12 hours ago. He looked at Alara for a long moment before speaking. She watched him visibly struggle with words that didn't come easily to officers who'd built careers on certainty. How many? His voice was rough from shouting orders over radio and gunfire. 17 confirmed kills, sir. Possibly more that I couldn't verify in darkness or at extreme range. 17. He shook his head slowly, the gesture carrying disbelief despite having witnessed it himself. Against an assault force of 200. The terrain helped, sir, channelize their movement patterns, limited approach routes, created engagement areas where I could... He interrupted gently. I'm told you tried to warn us yesterday about the outcropping, about their reconnaissance, about all of it. She didn't respond. The smoking technical vehicle on the eastern slope said everything that words couldn't. Thorne crouched beside her, grunting slightly as his knees protested. Up close, she could see the red rims around his eyes, the slight tremor in his hands that came from adrenaline crash and exhaustion combined. I owe you an apology, Corporal. We didn't give you a fair chance. We saw what we expected to see instead of what was actually there. That's failure of leadership on my part. That failure almost got us all killed. Permission to speak freely, sir. Granted. I didn't need a fair chance, sir. Her gray eyes met his directly. No challenge, no deference, just statement of fact. I just needed to do my job. Fair doesn't mean anything downrange. Only effective matters. He smiled faintly, the expression transforming his exhausted face into something almost peaceful. That's exactly why you're a better soldier than most of us. You understand what matters and what doesn't. He stood, joints popping audibly in the morning quiet. Battalion wants a full after-action report. I'm recommending you for the Silver Star. That's shot on the enemy commander at 520 meters in dawn wind, uphill angle. That wasn't just good shooting. That was something else entirely. That's not necessary, sir. It's not about necessary, Strand. It's about right. You held this defensive line together through individual action and exceptional marksmanship under fire. That deserves recognition, whether you want it or not. He started to leave, then turned back. Something in his expression had shifted. Recognition settling in. Memory connecting dots. That scope on your rifle, the one with DS-91 engraved on the side, that's your grandfather's, Declan Strand's actual scope from Desert Storm. Yes, sir, he built it himself. Custom glass, hand-fitted to his M40A1. He gave it to me when I enlisted, made me promise to mount it on whatever rifle I carried. Thorne was quiet for several seconds. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been reverence. I met your grandfather once, 2005, sniper instructor course at Quantico. He taught a 2-week session on adverse condition shooting. Best training I ever received. He talked about that 800-meter shot through the sandstorm, the one that saved Bravo Company in '91. Said it wasn't luck or skill. Said it was understanding that the desert has rules, and if you learn the rules, you can work within them. He told me the same thing, sir. Said most people look at distance and see impossible. Said I needed to look at distance and see geometry. Your shot this morning, the commander at 520 meters, that angle, that wind compensation. Thorne paused. That was Declan's shot, the exact same angle he used in Kuwait. I've studied that engagement 100 times. The trajectory, the holdover, the way he compensated for updraft on the slope. You replicated it perfectly. He made me practice it 1,000 times, sir. Said one day I'd need to save people he couldn't. Guess he was right. Thorne's eyes glistened slightly. He blinked rapidly, cleared his throat. He'd be proud, Corporal, not just of the shooting, of the restraint, of the discipline, of understanding when to fire and when to hold. That's wisdom most snipers never develop. You've got it at 30 years old because someone who understood the weight of killing taught you to respect that weight. He walked away, leaving her alone with her rifle and the growing awareness that something fundamental had changed. Not just in how these men saw her, in how she saw herself. She'd proven something she'd been trying to prove her entire adult life. That competence transcended assumptions. That performance mattered more than preconceptions. Sergeant Dalton approached carrying 2 bottles of water. He handed her one without speaking, then sat down beside her with a heavy sigh that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than physical exhaustion. They sat in silence for several minutes, both staring at the valley below where evidence of the night's violence slowly became more visible in strengthening daylight. I was wrong about you. His voice carried genuine contrition rather than grudging admission. Yes, Sergeant, you were. He laughed, a short bark of sound that held both surprise and appreciation. Not going to make it easy on me, are you? Would you, Sergeant? No, I wouldn't. He took a long drink of water. For what it's worth, I've been in the Army 26 years, served with a lot of snipers, good ones who went to special forces, ones who taught at the schoolhouse, ones with confirmed kills in double digits over entire deployments. He paused, looking at her directly. You're better than most of them. That technical shot at 280 while taking fire, the mortar team at 580 in darkness, that commander at 520 in dawn wind with an uphill angle. He shook his head. That wasn't luck. That was skill at a level most people never reach. It was math, Sergeant, ballistics and wind reading and trigger control. Nothing magical about it. Maybe, but there's a difference between knowing the math and executing it when people are shooting at you. When your position is taking mortar fire, when everything is chaos and fear and you still make the shot. That's not just math, that's something else. 3 days later at battalion headquarters, 20 kilometers from the forward operating base, Ilara sat through formal debriefing. The room was climate-controlled, jarring contrast to field conditions. Officers who'd never seen combat asked questions from prepared checklists. Shot placement, ammunition expenditure, rules of engagement compliance, target identification procedures. They wanted metrics, wanted everything quantified and categorized, want to transform combat into data points that could be analyzed and replicated. She answered precisely, clinically, giving them numbers without emotional context. 17 confirmed kills, approximately 80 rounds fired, 0 friendly casualties in assigned sector. Enemy assault defeated, mission accomplished. When the formal questioning finished, Lieutenant Colonel Thorne caught her in the hallway outside the briefing room. They're cutting orders, putting you in for advanced reconnaissance training. After that, probably special operations assignment. They want you somewhere your skills can be utilized at the highest level. I just want to do my job, sir. Your job is wherever the Army needs the best, Strand, and you're the best. Not the best female sniper, not good for someone your age, just the best, period. The sooner you accept that, the easier everything else becomes. He reached into his briefcase, pulled out a worn leather notebook. She recognized it immediately. Her grandfather's handwriting on the cover, Strand's Desert Manual. You showed me this 3 nights ago. After the engagement, I stayed up reading it, cover to cover. Twice. His voice carried wonder. 30 years of accumulated knowledge. Every technique he developed, every lesson he learned, every mistake and the corrections that followed. This isn't just a training manual, it's a legacy. He opened to the last page. pointed to handwriting she'd never seen before. Her grandfather's script, but different, shaky, written near the end. To whoever trains my granddaughter, she carries my skills, but not my sins. 52 lives taken. Let her save 520. Let her rewrite our story. Let her prove that darkness can birth light. She's not my legacy, she's my redemption. Protect her, guide her, then get out of her way and let her transcend everything I ever was. Declan Strand, March 2016. Thorne's voice broke slightly. He wrote this a month before he died. Wrote it to me. To whoever would be in position to help you or hinder you. He knew you'd face doubt, knew you'd face skepticism, knew some old bastard like me would see your gender before seeing your competence. He was asking us to be better, to recognize what he recognized when you were 6 years old, that you don't just have his skills, you have something more, the ability to transform killing into saving, death into life. Ilara felt tears threatening, pushed them back, not here, not now. He never told me he wrote that, because he knew you didn't need external validation, knew you'd prove yourself regardless of what anyone thought. But he also knew that leadership matters, that one commander's doubt can waste a generation of potential. He was hedging his bets, making sure that if you ended up with someone like me, someone who'd served long enough to be cynical, that person would have a chance to see past their own assumptions. Thorne closed the notebook, handed it back to her. I failed that test initially, saw what I expected instead of what was there. But you gave me a second chance, forced me to see by being undeniable. Thank you for that. And thank you for not listening to me when it mattered, for trusting your judgment over my orders. That takes courage most people don't have. The range stretched for 1,000 meters, marked at intervals with steel targets that rang like bells when hit properly. Ilara stood at the firing line with 18 students, 12 men, 6 women, all watching her with a particular attention that came from reputation preceding presence. She was an instructor now. Staff Sergeant Ilara Strand, promoted 2 ranks in 6 months, Silver Star recipient, 17 confirmed kills in 1 engagement. The story had spread through the sniper community like wildfire, had become legend before she'd even left Afghanistan. The young woman who'd held a defensive line against 200 attackers, who'd made the impossible 520-meter shot that decapitated enemy command structure, who'd proven that Declan Strand's legacy wasn't just history, it was living, breathing, continuing. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne sat in the observation tower, retired from active duty now, civilian advisor helping develop curriculum. He'd requested the assignment specifically, said he owed her grandfather a debt, said he'd spend his remaining productive years making sure that debt was paid forward to the next generation. Staff Sergeant Strand, you're up for demonstration. The range safety officer's voice carried across the line. She settled into position. 800 meters, 15-mile-per-hour crosswind, 30-degree uphill angle. The exact conditions her grandfather had faced in Kuwait. The exact shot he'd made through a sandstorm to save 43 Marines. She breathed, calculated, built the ballistic solution in her mind. Not conscious math anymore, just instinct built from 24 years of practice. The rifle cracked. 3 seconds later, the distinctive ring of steel hit center mass. One of the male students whistled low. Damn, that was fast. Most shooters take 2 minutes to set up that shot. She did it in 30 seconds. Because she knew the shot before she took position. The voice came from the observation tower. Thorne, speaking through the loudspeaker. Understanding that shooting is 10% trigger pull and 90% preparation. Most people spend their time on the trigger. She spends hers on everything that comes before. That's the Strand method. That's what separates good snipers from legendary ones. That evening in the classroom, Ilara stood before her students with Strand's Desert Manual open on the podium. The same notebook her grandfather had filled. the same pages that contain 3 decades of knowledge. My grandfather took his first life at 28 years old. Kuwait, Operation Desert Storm. 800 meters shot through a sandstorm. Saved 43 Marines. Over the next 100 days, he'd make 51 more confirmed kills. 52 total. He carried that weight for 28 years. Every single one. Never forgot. Never forgave himself. She paused. Let the weight of that sink in. He taught me to shoot when I was 6. Not because he wanted me to follow his path, because he wanted me to rewrite it. He said he'd taken 52 lives for his country. Said maybe I could save 520. Said that's how we break the curse. Turn death into life. Transform killing into protecting. She looked at each student, holding eye contact. 6 months ago, I made 17 confirmed kills in one engagement. Held a defensive line. 0 friendly casualties in my sector. They're calling it heroic. They're calling it legendary. You know what I call it? 17 families that lost someone. 17 lives ended. Yeah, they were trying to kill us. Yeah, it was necessary. But don't ever let anyone tell you that killing is glorious. It's not. It's mathematics executed with precision. It's geometry made lethal. It's necessary sometimes, but it's never glorious. A female student, Private First Class Dakota Reeves, raised her hand tentatively. Staff Sergeant, how do you deal with people not believing you? Before you prove yourself, I mean. Ilara smiled slightly. I didn't change their minds with words, Reeves. I changed the definition of what's possible. My grandfather did the same thing. 43 Marines went home to their families because one man understood that sandstorms have rules. That if you learn the rules, you can work within them. I held a defensive line because I understood that terrain has rules, that distance has rules, that wind and gravity and bullet drop all have rules. Learn the rules, master the rules, then execute when it matters. That's the only argument that works downrange. Over the next 3 months, Dakota Reeves failed her 400-meter qualification test 3 times. Each time, Ilara pulled her aside, worked with her individually, didn't criticize, didn't coddle, just taught, shared techniques from the desert manual, showed her how to read wind from vegetation movement, how to calculate holdover without conscious math, how to let the body execute what the mind had prepared. The 4th attempt, Dakota hit perfect center mass. 400 meters, crosswind, moving target, perfect shot. Ilara handed her a photocopied chapter from her grandfather's manual. Chapter 7, Shooting Through Fear. Keep this, study it, pass it on when you train someone else. That's how legacy works. Not hoarding knowledge, multiplying it. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. Don't thank me, Reeves. Thank Declan Strand. He wrote this in 1992, after Desert Storm, after carrying the weight of 52 kills. He wrote it hoping that someday, someone would use his darkness to create light. You just did. That's the mission continuing. 5 months later, May 2025, Ilara received a message through official channels. Dakota Reeves, now deployed to Syria, had made 4 confirmed kills during an ambush, had held her position under sustained fire, had protected 9 teammates who'd have died without her precision fire. 0 friendly casualties. Ilara sat alone in her quarters, staring at the message. Did the math in her head. Her grandfather, 52 kills, Desert Storm. Herself, 17 kills, Afghanistan. Dakota, 4 kills, Syria. But the real numbers were different. Her grandfather had saved 43 Marines with 1 shot, had trained hundreds of snipers over his career. Those snipers had saved thousands. She'd saved 13 soldiers in her sector, was now training 847 students. Those students would save how many? 10,000? 20,000? Dakota had saved 9 teammates, would train how many future soldiers? The multiplication was exponential, geometric. One man's darkness in 1991 transformed through 3 decades into light that kept spreading, kept multiplying, kept growing. She opened Strand's Desert Manual to the last page. Below her grandfather's final entry, she wrote, Generation 1, Master Gunnery Sergeant Declan Strand, 52 kills, Desert Storm, 43 saved, 1 engagement, 800 trained, lifetime. Estimated impact, 12,000 lives. Generation 2, Staff Sergeant Elara Strand, 17 kills, Afghanistan, 13 saved, 1 engagement, 847 trained, current. Estimated impact, 15,000 lives and counting. Generation 3, PFC Dakota Reeves, 4 kills, Syria, 9 saved, 1 engagement. Future training, unknown. Potential impact, unlimited. Mission status, 52 deaths transformed into 27,000 plus lives saved through 3 generations. The curse is broken. The legacy continues, not of killing, but of protecting. Not of taking, but of multiplying. Declan Strand's darkness has birthed an army of light, and it's still growing. She closed the notebook, placed it carefully in her locker. Tomorrow she'd teach another class, train another generation, add more names to the exponential equation her grandfather had started. The knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. Lieutenant Colonel Thorne stood in the hallway, holding an official-looking folder. Got a minute, Staff Sergeant? Of course, sir. He entered, sat down heavily in the chair opposite her desk. He looked older than his 59 years, but his eyes held something that might have been peace. Just got confirmation from the Army War College. They want to do a case study on the FOB Sentinel engagement. Use it as training material for defensive operations. They're calling it the Strand Defense. Has a nice ring to it. That's not necessary, sir. Necessary? No, right? Absolutely. Elara, what you did 6 months ago wasn't just good soldiering. It was a proof of concept. Proof that precision can overcome numbers. That one shooter who understands terrain and ballistics can change the outcome of an entire engagement. That gender doesn't matter, age doesn't matter, only competence matters. He opened the folder. Inside were photographs. The outcropping at 280 meters, the riverbed approach, the defensive positions, annotated with her predictions from before the attack. Compared with what actually happened, the correlation was nearly perfect. You saw it all coming, the approach routes, the technical position, the flanking maneuver, everything, and we ignored you. Know why? Because we couldn't believe someone your age, someone your gender, someone so new could possibly see what we'd missed. You believed when it mattered, sir. That's what counts. Did I? Or did you force me to believe by being undeniable? There's a difference. He pulled out one more document, a letter, handwritten, her grandfather's script. Found this in the archives. Letter your grandfather sent me in 2006, after we met at instructor course. I'd forgotten about it, kept it in my files, never really processed what he was saying until now. He handed it to her. She read, Garrett, met a young captain at my instructor course this year who reminded me why I still teach. You've got the instinct, the understanding that shooting is 90% preparation. Hold on to that. The Army needs officers who understand that competence transcends assumptions, that the best shooter isn't always the one you expect. I've got a granddaughter, 12 years old, been training her since she was 6. She's got the gift, sees what others miss. One day she'll be a soldier, maybe a sniper. When that day comes, she'll face doubt from people who see her gender before seeing her competence. If you're still serving when she arrives, do me a favor. Give her the chance I gave you. Let her prove herself, then get out of her way and let her transcend everything we ever were. The future of warfare isn't about who's strongest or toughest. It's about who sees clearest and shoots truest. She's that future. Protect it. Declan Strand. Elara's hands trembled slightly. Her grandfather had known. 14 years before FOB Sentinel. He'd known she'd face Thorne, known she'd face doubt, known she'd need someone to give her the chance that mattered. He was playing the long game, Thorne said quietly, preparing the ground years in advance, making sure that when you arrived, at least one person in position of authority would have a chance to do the right thing. I almost didn't, almost wasted everything he'd prepared, but you didn't let me. You forced me to see by being undeniable. He always said the best plans account for human failure, sir. Guess he was right. Thorne stood, extended his hand. She shook it. Your grandfather saved 43 Marines in Kuwait, including the father of one of your current students, Corporal Brennan Hayes. His dad was in Bravo Company that day, 18 years old. Would have died in that riverbed if Declan hadn't made that 800-meter shot. Hayes Sr. lived, had a son. That son is now training under you, learning the Strand method from the next generation. That's not legacy, Alara. That's immortality. After he left, Alara walked to the range one final time before lights out. Evening quiet, other instructors having returned to barracks. She stood at the firing line alone, looking downrange at targets waiting in growing darkness. She set up at the 520-meter line, the distance that had defined everything. Dawn wind simulation fans created crosswind conditions. Elevated platform provided uphill angle. Every variable replicated from that morning in Afghanistan. She breathed. Let the Montana wind carry her back to that first day. 6 years old, tin can at 300 yards, her grandfather's weathered hand on her shoulder. Why do I need to learn this, Grandpa? Because I took lives for my country, sweetheart, and maybe you'll save 520. Calculated, the ballistic solution appearing in her mind like muscle memory, like prayer, like the accumulated weight of 10,000 practice shots condensed into one moment of perfect clarity. Fired. 520 meters away, the target rang, the same distance as the enemy commander, the same angle, the same wind, the shot that had defined everything, the shot that had transformed 52 deaths into an army of salvation that was still multiplying across continents and generations. She lowered the rifle, closed her eyes, and for the first time since FOB Sentinel, let herself feel it. Not pride, not satisfaction, something deeper, something that might have been peace. The curse was broken. Her grandfather had carried 52 stones in his pockets for 28 years, had died believing he'd never put them down. But he had. He'd transformed them, one stone at a time, through her hands, through Dakota's hands, through 847 students who would each train hundreds more. The mathematics were beautiful in their simplicity. One man's darkness in 1991, multiplied through 3 generations into 27,000 lives saved, and growing, exponentially, geometrically, inevitably. She opened her eyes, looked downrange at the target still ringing faintly in the evening air, thought about the letter Thorne had shown her, the one her grandfather had written 14 years ago, preparing the ground for a future he'd never see. Give her the chance I gave you, then get out of her way and let her transcend everything we ever were. She'd transcended it, not by being better than her grandfather, by being different, by understanding that the gift he'd used to take 52 lives, she could use to save 52,000. That legacy wasn't about replication, it was about transformation. A text buzzed on her phone. Dakota Reeves, now deployed to Syria. Staff Sergeant, used Chapter 7 today. Shooting through fear. Made the shot that mattered. 9 teammates going home because of what you taught me. Because of what he taught you. The Strand method works. The curse is broken. The mission continues. Thank you. Ilara typed back. Don't thank me. Thank Master Gunnery Sergeant Declan Strand. Desert Storm, 1991. He started this. We're just the echo of that first shot through the sandstorm. Keep multiplying the light. She put the phone away, picked up her rifle, ran her hand along the custom scope her grandfather had built 33 years ago, in a desert on the other side of the world. DS-91, Desert Storm, 1991, the year darkness learned it could birth light. The year 52 deaths planted seeds that would bloom into a forest of salvation. The year one man made one impossible shot and accidentally created immortality. The phrase echoed in her memory. Just a girl. They'd sneered it 3 days after her arrival, whispered it while she cleaned her rifle, dismissed her warnings with it. She'd answered with 17 shots, with 0 friendly casualties, with a defensive line that held when it should have collapsed. The shooting range didn't care about politics or prejudice, only precision, only results, only whether the bullet went where you aimed it when lives hung in the balance. But the real answer was bigger than 17 kills or silver stars pinned to dress uniforms. The real answer was written in her grandfather's shaky handwriting on the last page of a leather notebook, written 1 month before he died, written to a future he'd engineered but would never witness. She's not my legacy, she's my redemption. He'd been wrong about that. She was both. And so was every student she trained, every soldier they saved, every generation that carried the Strand method forward into futures no one could predict. The Montana wind picked up, carried the smell of sage and distant snow, the same wind that had blown across this ranch when she was 6 years old, learning to see what others missed, learning that distance was just geometry waiting to be solved. She slung her rifle, walked back toward the barracks. Tomorrow would bring another class, another generation, another opportunity to multiply light from darkness. Behind her, the target at 520 meters swayed gently in the wind, still ringing, still singing the song her grandfather had composed 33 years ago with copper and lead and the mathematics of redemption. The song wasn't finished. It was just beginning.